No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, we're going to be going over part 2 in our 4-part series, going over the elements of Ron Carucci's book, To Be Honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose. This is based on the interview that I had with Ron about a week and a half ago now that just has gotten, it still is getting a lot of downloads and streams. There are people who are checking it out. Like the trail off that normally happens on an episode is not happening as quickly with this one. And I really like that because I enjoyed the interview a lot. It's a fantastic book. Definitely go pick it up and read it. But we, on this 4-week series, are talking about these 4 elements of how companies can focus on being honest. And last week we talked about having a clear identity, so go check out that episode if you haven't yet. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about accountability. And accountability is, it was the most difficult one for me when I was talking with Ron around these 4 concepts, around what this looks like, because my lens looking through things is a lot of retail leadership, and there's a lot of redundancy in retail. There's a lot of people doing the exact same job. You might have a team of 5 or 20 or 50 people who all have the exact same job description, or 90% the same job description. And so it seems very easy to get into a situation where we're, kind of force ranking those people, holding them accountable to the same standard. And the conversation I had with Ron was around how to make sure that I understand that doing that kind of like cookie cutter, holding people accountable to the exact same thing, was the wrong thing to do. And so let me ask you a question. First of all, Lorenzo, have you been in a situation where you ever felt like you were being held accountable for something and you thought it was just completely unfair?
Yes, a couple times, yes. I think in being kind of told or directed to go do something, whether I, probably disagreed with it or didn't think that was the right move, and then a result of doing that thing that I was directed to go do, it happened to not go the way that maybe the organization or the leader thought it was going to go. Right. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, how are you going to fix it? And I was like, well, I wouldn't have broken it to begin with, right? So it's, yes. So sometimes that does happen. I think that in the context of accountability, and you kind of brought up, retail as a whole, you're right. A lot of the job across the retail industry is you're serving customers, and, there's a customer service element to it, and there's a relationship building element to it. And a lot of the things that you measure, across all organizations are very similar, and everybody kind of plays in the same spaces. And I think that it's a data point. It's a great data point to see maybe what's capable. You have people that kind of become outliers, and you by kind of looking at the collective of a team and their collective performance, you can see where some people are having success in some strategies and elements, and you can see where some people are having opportunities. And under the right leadership, you can connect those 2 groups of people. To find out what are the things that you can take from those that are having success and scaling them and helping others, and you can find the ones that may be trying but struggling and connect them with people and leaders that can help them build the skill or look at a different way of approaching the work itself. So I think that there is definitely the value in the specific retail industry in assessing results collectively that way. But I also think you have to take into account, the uniqueness of individuals, like Ron is saying, and the fact that many times you have people that play certain roles amongst a team that doesn't necessarily show up in a kind of force-ranked scorecard element of how you would look at things. And so as a leader, you also have to be very attuned to that and make sure that where they're adding value is in fact truly adding value in a different way, but also that you're not pulling them too far away from what the actual responsibility of the job is. Because that's another temptation thing that can happen when you have teams of people that all do the same job. It can become very easy to take somebody kind of almost out of the role completely, give them a different level of expectations or goals they're going to set. But the reality is, like, they're still actually in that role. And so the things that you would measure from a performance standpoint are still real things. And so you have to be kind of conscious in how you do that type of work.
Right. The concept that the words that Ron uses in his book is the concept of scaling sameness like fairness. Those are his words. And I think it's a brilliant way to put it. It's this idea that in order to be fair, I hold people accountable to exactly the same thing in the exact same way. And that on the surface, that might seem like the right thing to do. Because you want your accountability to be objective. You want to make sure that people don't feel like you're picking and choosing. Oh, I like this person more, so I'm gonna hold them to a lesser standard. Because if you're going about it that way, that's not right either. But holding people to the exact same standards when they bring different things to the team from a skill set standpoint is also the wrong thing to do. I look at there's a meme that has been circulating for a long time on the difference between equality and equity, and it shows 3 people trying to watch a baseball game, and there are 3 blocks that have been given to these 3 people to be able to watch the baseball game looking over a fence. And when you and one person is short, one person is medium, and one person is tall, and when you give all 3 of them one block, the short person still isn't tall enough to see over the fence. The medium person can see over the fence. The tall person can see very much over the fence, but they could have without the block also. And if you take the block from the tall person and give it to the short person to where they have 2, the medium person has 1, and the tall person has 0, now that their heads are all at the exact same height looking over the fence, and they're all able to kind of play in that space. And I see that in leaders a lot. I see a lot of leaders try to kind of divvy up their time amongst their people. They say, oh, I have 7 direct reports, and I have 7 one-on-ones, and they each, I get 30 minutes for each person. It's like, well, what if one of your people needs 2 hours? What if one of your people needs 10 minutes? Like that's not being unfair to meet your people where they are and to give them the elements that you believe they need in order to be successful, if you're grounding it in a desire to make them successful, and there's a partnership between you and those people around what they need, so they can articulate what they say they need, as opposed to you just saying, oh, I'm gonna just be, I'm gonna just like kind of divvy this out exactly the same way, that way no one can ever say, well, that person got more time with me. If people are saying that about you, it's rooted in something else. It's rooted in a general belief that you're not fair with other things, not about how much time you spent in a one-on-one with them.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And the reality is that a lot of leadership in a lot of organizations is based upon like process and time, and kind of like the fairness of how you spend your time. Like every company's got, whether it's, annual, yearly reviews, or they have an expectation around how you spend time with your people. Is it once a week? Is it once a month? How do you validate and check in on the work that they're doing? But I think if you look at the data, in the 2017 Gallup report, shared that only 14% of employees felt that their performance was being managed in a way that motivated them to improve. 1/4 of all employees got feedback less than once per year, and 1/5 of employees feel like their performance metrics are in their control. So only 1/5, 1 in 5 felt like I'm actually in control of my performance metrics. So what that tells me, and taking all of that data in those very, very low numbers, is that the way in which it's been working is not creating the environment that is allowing there to be kind of the flexibility needed to meet people where they're at. The way that it's being measured is done in such a way that it's not actually motivating people to improve. And again, we've spent hours talking about the relationship you have with your people, getting to know them, understanding what motivates them, what demotivates them, having the dialogue around, well, here's the expectations of the role that you have. And I think that to me is where the consistency or the fairness has to live. Is like the minimum expectation is that everybody is doing at least the minimum expectations of the job. Whatever those things are defined by the leader, the organization, this is the baseline of you must be here in regards to doing your work and your job. Once we start to move beyond the basic minimum expectation, now we get into the space where we can start to really meet people where they're at, help those that are, just getting over kind of the achieved, element of their job and want to get better over time. And then meeting those that have easily met that mark and are looking for more. Like that, as a leader, to your point, is now thinking about how and where do I spend my time with who, and how do I continue to add value to them at the pace in which they are learning and moving. Because I think that's the other part of this that a lot of organizations feel. And like I feel this as a leader. There are many times I'm in a room, I'm in a training, I'm doing something, I'm on a call that I feel is like, who is this for? Because if this content is for me, then maybe I am not the leader that I've learned to be over 20 years.
Right.
Like this feels very elementary. It feels very basic. Like if this is something that you need me to understand, what does that actually say about me? And like
What do these people think about me? If they think I need to learn this now and that I don't already know this, what does it say about how they think about me?
Right. Like, one of my most favorite things recently that I've seen in like a lot of like the e-learning type elements when it comes to leadership stuff is the ability for you to not to opt out, but to test out.
Oh,
like,
yeah. You take the test at first, and then it's like, yeah. Oh, I love that stuff.
Exactly. And then here's the spaces that you need to dig into. I love that. Right. Because that makes sense to me, because it's okay if you are a leader new in role. It's okay if you're just now taking on the responsibility of leading teams and you need this data and this information. But if you're taking somebody with a lot of experience and making me spend 4 hours doing something that I already know the answers to, that to me doesn't make a lot of sense. And it not only does it feel like I'm wasting my time, I feel like I'm wasting the organization's time. I feel like I'm wasting the organization's resources. And then I'm questioning whether or not, like, am I even in the right job if this is how somebody would feel about me and what I'm responsible for on the bigger level.
Yeah, that's so true. I like what you said earlier around holding people accountable, but then honoring kind of the contribution they make. And so I think about, like, let's say I have like 30 salespeople reporting to me, and they have a certain level of productivity they're expected to achieve. There's they each have to produce $100,000 a year in revenue, whatever that number is for your team, and you notice that one or two of those people, they're great employees. Like you really like their contribution. They're a go-to person for something, for a lot of things, but they're not hitting that number. They're 20% or 30% less than that. And you start to realize that, the reason they're 20 or 30% less is because whenever you have a customer who has said, this was a terrible experience, I don't ever want to be here again, they're the one you go to say, hey, I need you to go talk to this customer, because they are the ones that can talk that customer off a ledge. They're the ones who can spend the time with the customer saying, hey, you know what? We're going to do better next time. Let us work with you. Let us kind of let's save the relationship, so to speak. And if you're going to them for that kind of work, you are taking them out of the day of the stuff they're supposed to be doing every day to hit that $100,000 mark. And so if you're taking them out of that mindset, or out of that space where that's what they're supposed to be doing, because you're leveraging a skill that they have, then it's completely unfair for you to hold them accountable to the standard that is being achieved by people who don't have to deal with those problematic customers. They're just focusing on plugging along, generating revenue. Because at the end of the day, there are standards, there are kind of minimum standards that an organization has. But if you're the leader and you're writing their review, you're the one who gets to go in and say how this person did for the year. And if you can mitigate that, say, well, this person didn't hit this revenue standard, but let's quantify, or at least try to quantify, the revenue that we didn't lose because of the work this person did, and you're able to add that into that, even though it's not an actual kind of a one-to-one thing, you can justify why you're giving this person maybe a higher rating than you would have if it was just based on this kind of arbitrary force ranking of numbers, which is only fair if you're talking about leading a team of robots. If you have a team, if they have people that literally have exactly the same contribution, they're selling widgets, or they're moving cogs from one place to another, that makes sense. But there are so few positions and so few organizations where there are positions like that nowadays. People are generally kind of leveraged for individual skills they bring. And so if your accountability to them is not taking that into account, I think you're failing as a leader.
Another data point from that same 2017 Gallup report said 70% of employees feel their managers are not objective in how they evaluate performance.
There you go. Well, that's what I just talked about, is intentionally not being objective. Because you can't do that by itself. You have to do that along with the dialogue, the conversation around why you're doing what you're doing.
And what that also tells me is that you're not clear about what the actual performance is that's expected.
Sure.
Because if you're super clear on it, then being objective is easy.
Sure.
Here's like
Yeah.
to your numbers, like, here's the goal, and this is the goal that we're looking to achieve, that everybody needs to get done, this amount of things in this amount of time, or whatever the case is, and either you're above that or you're below that. That's a very objective thing. But the reality is, when we talk about things like, you want people to be uniquely themselves when they come to work, you want people to push themselves to get better, you want people to take calculated risks and go beyond, just the basics of the job. Well, if that's what you're going to ask people to do, you got to figure out a way to make sure that you're measuring that impact as well, and that performance as well, and those types of things as well. You can't just say, I'm only going to measure you on the basics of these 5 or 6 things, but then I'm going to ask you to do another 5 or 10 or 15 other things, and then not subjectively or not consider how those things have an impact on your career progression or your compensation or things like that. So I think it's absolutely an element of leadership to consider and think about, what are the things that are being asked of the individual. And then as a leader, are you adding complexity to the measurement? Are you adding more responsibility, whether you're saying that this is about their development or something else? And then how are you making sure that that's taken into consideration when it comes to measuring their performance and holding them accountable?
Right. And this isn't, we want to be clear here, this is not about making excuses for people that allow them to get away with not performing. This isn't about saying, well, it looks like this person who's bringing up the rear in every performance metric, well, they try really hard. That's not what this is. If you have the wrong people on your team, if there are people who shouldn't be there because they're not a fit for their role, or because their performance is consistently below what the expectation is, and you can't justify it with other things. You can't say, this is how I'm leveraging this person. This is the skills they bring to the table that are very unique, that we don't have another person that can do this, and we leverage this person for these. If you can't say those things, that person needs to go away, or they need to be held accountable to the point until they go away. Hopefully you do that well, and you help them do that with grace and with dignity. But that doesn't mean that you allow a low performer to stay on your team. It means you recognize what performance actually means and don't allow someone else to define it for you. Don't let someone say, this is the scorecard, this is how we define performance. If you're going to do it that way, then you need to be very clear with your people that you have no control over this. This is how the organization's doing it. We're not going to take into account all these other things. And then be prepared for that person who you leverage to help with that problem customer to say back to you, hey, you know what? I know that I appreciate you put me in these situations, but you know what? I'm actually not missing. I'm missing my goals now because you're doing it. So I'm going to have to decline. I'm going to have to say I'm not going to help out with these problem customers anymore. The person who did the sale needs to be the one to deal with that problem customer. So now those problem customers are kind of spread out amongst everybody, and now I have an equal shot at meeting that $100,000 sales goal as everybody else does. Be prepared to get that in return if your decision is to hold people to the exact same standard. But if you can honor people for what their contribution is, if you can make them believe that you can see it in action, that you understand what they bring and you understand where they struggle, and you might get them maybe, the top salesperson is a 10, the bottom salesperson is a 1, for just argument's sake, you might be able to get them to a 3 or a 4, whatever that is. But if you can say that their existence is a net positive to the team because of this, and this, maybe that's okay. If you can't, then you can't, and you have those conversations. But I think this kind of subjective element of leadership, that's what leadership is. The objective element, that's management. And I'm not saying management isn't needed. We need to manage numbers. We need to manage scorecards. But you don't manage people. You lead people. And if you want to be a leader of people, there is some subjectivity that goes along with it. But if presented the right way, your people will not ding you for that. They won't say they're leading subjectively. Well, you're supposed to lead subjectively.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1-minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
The 1-minute hack.
All right, for this episode's 1-minute hack, here's what I want you to do. I want you to write down a list of all of your direct reports. That's anybody whose development and performance review and feedback and performance counseling, anybody where that's your responsibility, write down all their names. And then I want you to write down a list of all of the metrics or expectations that your company has that kind of apply to everybody, that they all get held accountable to. And then what I want you to do is I want you to write down under each of their names the things that you hold them accountable to, the things that you leverage from them, the skills that you believe that they bring to the table that might not align with what the company objectives are, but they're things that you have leveraged out of each of them. And hopefully you can come up with 1 or 2 for each of these people. And it might just be that, hey, there's nothing that fits into that category, but they are number 1 with a bullet on all the things the company sets forth as the objectives. That's fine too. That's a great contribution to be able to meet all those goals. But write that down for all those people. And then I want you to think, Have I had these conversations with these people on what their contribution is? Have I gone to the person who might not be number 1 or number 2 or number 3 in terms of a sales aspect and told them about why they get leverage to do this and this and this instead, and what value I see in them as a team member, what value they bring to the team, and make sure they understand that that's part of what they're being held accountable to in terms of their review or their career progression, and that it isn't necessarily just the objective measures that the company has. Have those conversations with your people, and you'll set them up to not feel like they're choosing between doing what they love or what they're good at versus what the company is saying they have to do in order to get better. The more you can have those conversations with your people, the more they're going to feel confident going forward in their day-to-day actions.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1-minute hack, and I think it's super important to be, me, vision, clarity, support, right?
Yeah.
Being very clear on the expectations that you have for the team, their expectations of you, and then we have dialogue around that extra work or that subjective work or the way in which people add value that might not be in a job description or on the surface measured in whatever it is that you use to measure success. So I think that those conversations are so important, and making sure that you have the balance of not pulling people too far away from the role in which they are actually responsible for, to make sure that they can get measured appropriately, that they can have a consistent level of experience for the role that they have, and that they're able to, let's say that you were to move on to another company or get promoted or move, having to have the correct expectations of the role that everybody has and document those things is super important for the next leader to take on the team.
That last part right there, I think, is the most critical part, because it's not just about making sure that the next leader sees what their contribution was if you were to move on. It's because whoever your leader is, 1, maybe or 2 levels above you, they are less likely to see what that individual contribution is from those people that you're seeing because they report directly to you. You need to articulate that to your boss and your boss's boss if you have a relationship with them, because all they're seeing is that scorecard. All they're seeing is that force rank, and they're going to be coming to you asking you, hey, where are the gaps? Why is this person great and this person's not so great? In your mind, you're thinking, well, yeah, I know this person's not so great, but think about all the other stuff they do. Yeah, don't just think it, tell them. Say, this is the things that they do. This is how I leverage those people. Create that conversation with your direct leader or even 1 level above them so that they lay off of you on why you include them in the team, and why that it might just be that they are hitting a minimum expectation, but they're not like kind of, flourishing in this one particular scorecard. But the contribution can be articulated at what they bring to the team.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.